Hey there, everybody. Welcome to our review and reaction to Shrinking Season 1, Episode 1. We have made it into Jimmy's office. We are here
Mhm.
to have a conversation about one of the funniest, most engaging shows of this year on Apple TV Plus.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it has a huge cast of really big iconic names. I mean, Harrison Ford.
Yeah.
It's incredible, this show. I am really thankful to everybody over on our Patreon for suggesting this show to us. I know that Matt had already seen this
Yeah.
show, but I hadn't. I had just heard about it. People kept saying it was really good, and after our live recently where everyone was like, "Guys, can you please just cover this show?" It's like, "Okay, it's time."
Okay. So, yeah, as you mentioned, full disclosure from the start, I have seen all of Season 1, but
I have not. I have
yeah.
seen just this episode.
I am locking all the other episodes off in the vault back here. I am not going to talk about them. I'm not going to spoil anything beyond episode 1 because if you guys are watching from the start Shrinking, you guys should be able to enjoy this experience too because this pilot is rich, it's interesting. I think there's a lot of different things to talk about. There are conversations to be had about each individual person. I was about to say each individual people. I was like, what is that?
Like Gabby, listen, when I saw Gabby with her water being like, "Look at this dewy skin," I was like, "Uh-oh." I'm that person. I drink an entire hydro flask every day.
Do you feel seen while watching
I
Shrinking?
do feel seen. Thank you, Gabby.
Gabby is fantastic. Everyone on this show is fantastic. Now, we will be here talking about Shrinking twice a week
Mhm.
as we go through all of season 1. So we hope you guys enjoy this ride. And as Jess mentioned earlier, we have a Patreon. You can join that by checking out the link in the description below. We have lives there every single Tuesday. So if you want to come on, discuss TV with us, share some shows that you're watching, things you want to see covered here on the YouTube. That is a really great venue for that. And we, of course, appreciate everyone who is over there on our Patreon already.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's sort of give an overall general view of what this pilot is about for people
Yeah.
who haven't seen the show that might want to check it out. So we have Jimmy. Jimmy is a therapist and he's also going through his own trauma. He has lost his wife in a freak car accident
Yeah.
and he's not handling it very well. He has a teenage daughter, Alice, who has had to kind of handle it on her own because her dad has gone off the deep end. He's drinking, drugs, women, up all night. He is not functioning. So the neighbor has had to kind of step in and help with Alice. Alice has just had to step up and help herself, which has been, she's going through the exact same trauma that Jimmy is also going through. And it was very interesting near the end when Jimmy kind of realizes he's really let his daughter down. It's tough because everybody deals with grief differently. Full transparency, I'm a former funeral director, so I went to school for grief
Yeah.
and all of that. So everybody really does deal with grief differently, and watching the show, I could see a lot of people would be like, "Jimmy, your daughter is also going through this, step up." It is very difficult to say how somebody's going to be able to grieve this. And he said something that was just so heartbreaking at the end of this episode where he looked his daughter in the face and was basically like, "I'm having trouble being around you because you look just like her." And it was just like, the daughter's all is so young. She's still a child. She's going through this trauma herself. Has doesn't have her dad. Her mom is gone, and now it's like, "Oh, cool. I also get to have my dad avoid me because I look like her." This pilot just really just kept the hits kept coming.
The first few minutes of the pilot and the final 30 seconds of the pilot are just next level outstanding with how all of that is done. Like the line between Jivy and Alice, that you look just like your mom. Like that is it's something that happens in life. It's not something that
100%.
shows explore because it's uncomfortable, and
Very.
a lot of shows just want to like go off, hide in their own little corner, not have to think about those sort of things. It puts it right on Front Street, but in the opening, it also puts it right on Front Street. That's like, guess what? Just because like it is his job to be able to help people through problems, to be able to make other people feel better, that doesn't mean that he's not a disaster, because he is a total disaster. And I just love how they frame all of it, how he's playing music in the middle of the night. Liz is yelling at him. He shows up and he looks like the person who's going to be needing the therapy, the guy who's sitting there already, the patient. He looks like a therapist, and this is obviously really intentional. And then Jimmy is just like, so what brings you in today? How are you feeling? And I'm just sitting here being like, dude, like how can you flip the switch like this? You are a mess.
Yeah, and it's an interesting dive into it because clearly Jimmy's been a therapist for a while and he's not really believing in what he's selling. I mean, we saw him kind of have a break with one of his patients where he ends up just saying, "Leave your husband or else I'm not your therapist anymore. That it's not working. You've been seeing me for 2 years.
Yeah.
You're not getting better. This is what you have to do," which is, if anyone who's been to therapy, that that is not what therapists are really supposed to do. They're not supposed to tell you what to do. They're supposed to kind of guide you so that you can figure it out on your own and get to that spot on your own, because change only works if you get there as a realization inside yourself. You can't just tell somebody to do something. But it's interesting that he doesn't really believe in what he's selling because when he had his own, tragedy happen, he didn't see anybody.
Yeah, and it's another sort of reminder that just because it's your job doesn't mean you know how to help yourself. Sometimes you need other people to work and trying to figure out how to help you. And I think that is all explained really, really well within this first episode. But I
Yeah.
mean, you mentioned the patient here who had who has the husband who was just awful and
Awful.
terrible. She's played by Heidi Gardner, and this is one of the things the show does really well, is that like she's one of my favorite people on SNL right now. And it's like I didn't know she was going to be on the show because she wasn't like announced to some of these other people. Like, oh, it's Heidi Gardner. This makes me happy. It's a different sort of role with her. The casting, like, really from start to finish on this show is really, really good. So now we're getting into the Jason Segel conversation here. So he's one of my favorite actors. Like, I'm gonna make that really clear from the start. Like, there is bias and there is like next level bias, where if this show had sucked, I probably would have still tried to convince myself that it's actually really, really good. Because, for starters, how can I not love a guy whose nickname in high school was Dr. Dunk because he's really tall and plays basketball? But no, beyond all of that, yes, the end of How I Met Your Mother was terrible, but I loved the show for a long time. He was one of my favorite people on it. Forgetting Sarah Marshall, one of my favorite movies. And I'm just really fascinated by him because he doesn't seem to care that much about being famous or a celebrity. Like, he's been gone from the public eye here and there for really long stretches. He hasn't used social media in years. And I kind of feel like, for me, that's a part of what makes him so appealing to me to watch, is just like, he makes me miss him when he's not around, and then I get to see him again. It's like, oh, Jason, my old pal, I haven't seen you in a while. I'm so happy. But he just plays characters that are so relatable and so messy and so interesting, and he's really willing to put himself out there, and I guess just so much respect for that. And I'm pleased to say, newly minted Emmy nominee Jason Segel, hats off to you.
Yeah, I mean, the cast overall, they do have some really big names like Jason, like Harrison Ford. I mean, I haven't seen everything Harrison Ford has done. I mean, I'd be watching movies forever, but
Mhm.
really he plays a lot of fantastical type of
Yeah.
characters like Han Solo, who to me, is not really that relatable because he's, in space. He's a space cowboy. Or Indiana Jones, like, same thing. He's this bigger than life characters. And then He's on this show as Paul. And he's just another therapist who's very down to earth, who's really trying to pull Jimmy back when Jimmy comes to him with this great idea where he's like, I think I fixed this patient. I told her to, go dump her husband, and she did, and she's so much happier. And then you got Paul being like, okay, Jimmy, like, we can't do that. It's so unethical. Like, what are you doing? We're here to help people. We need to guide people. And it was nice to have Harrison Ford in this type of role where he's a lot more relatable. He's a lot more sort of down to earth and a little more reasonable.
I'm Harrison Ford. I'm here to do this video
What
about
is
shrinking.
happening?
See, look, this is one of my favorite Harrison Ford roles ever. I'll just throw that out there. I mean,
He's great.
like you, I have not seen every single thing that Harrison Ford has done. I will put that out there. However, I have never seen Harrison Ford do this, where he is kind of this normal older gentleman who is going through some of his own problems, but he has a very sort of straight-laced view of what therapy is, what it should be, and his presence in this pilot is so important just because of the fact that, once again, I guess, full disclosure, I have been to a number of therapists in my life. Like, I have dealt with depression here on and off for various years. And so I have a lot of experience in my head of like, okay, what does therapy mean? What is the process like? What is it like going and talking to somebody about your
Mhm.
problems? And of course, we see Jimmy in this episode just, basically saying, leave your husband or, I'm going to stop seeing you. And then we have everything with Sean
Oh,
that we
God.
will get to Sean in just a minute here. And like the realistic part of my brain is like, okay, this would never happen. But Paul is there to sort of balance all of that out and basically be the voice of the audience. And beyond all of that, Bill Lawrence, who is executive producer on Shrinking, he was really the main driving force beyond Sudeikis for like the first couple Ted Lasso
Mhm.
seasons. He did Scrubs, which, I love Scrubs so much. Apparently, like, they talked to like dozens upon dozens of therapists for this show. They didn't just be like, okay, let's just pretend that a therapist is going to do all of this. So there is some sort of grounding in experience that they've heard that gives some credibility to all of this. And
Mhm.
that enables me to at least go along for Jimmy's crazy ride, even though I'm just like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah, seeing how he dealt with things with Sean, where he's coming in for, pretty severe anger issues. He's, hospitalized somebody. He just sees red and goes off for the littlest things. And here we have Jimmy being like, it worked for this one patient. Let's try it with this patient. I was going to take him to like an MMA, fighting ring and get him to get his aggression out here while we work on some of the inner stuff over here, kind of thing. Can this work? And we do see it actually kind of working, where Sean does have somebody shoulder him, and instead of fighting back, he calls Jimmy and is like, hey, this happened. I didn't do anything. I called you, like, let's go see your daughter play soccer. And they're on this sort of journey together where they've really connected, which is why at the end of this, when it all really starts to go sideways for Jimmy, it's just like, man, it was working, but yeah, there's consequences. The husband of this wife shows up and is like, hey, I'm paying you to help my wife, not to make her leave me, and starts beating up Jimmy. And, Sean is so invested in Jimmy now that he's like, oh, no, no, no. And he goes off, he's arrested. It's just everything just goes sideways so fast.
I'll admit I was of two minds with this ending, and I think it's complicated because there's one side of it's like, as much as I love Jimmy, I'm glad there were consequences to his actions, like right away.
Yeah, right
Like,
away.
you can't do some of the things that he's doing and think that, oh, this is just gonna work all the time. It's gonna be great. Nothing's ever gonna be mad at me. It's not like, the people who sent Sean to me in the first place. They didn't send Sean to you so you could go take him to, MMA practice
I
and do
know.
hands-on training and drink blue slushies with him. Like, they took him with he was supposed to just be sitting there in the room, but you develop such this codependent relationship, which is also very messy. Like, this is what therapists tell you not to do, Jimmy, be codependent. with other people. You're now relying on this guy for advice. And ultimately, you're in the situation where you're at the soccer game and, oh, here come the other consequences. Here come the husband. And I'm typically not the person who is just like, does this make sense? Would this happen? Like, is this realistic? I'm usually able to let a lot of things go and just sort of like turn off that part of my brain and just justify it. But it was very coincidental to me that, like, oh, okay, the husband just so happens to show up at like the one soccer game that Jimmy is actually at. Was he following him the whole time? Like, how does all this go together? Like, I probably asked myself more questions than I really wanted to about it.
Yeah, I feel that this would probably happen just because if the husband had been doing this to his wife for all these years and the wife's been in therapy for 2 years because of this, and he's obviously a very controlling person. I mean, even when he shows up to Jimmy, he's like, "I'm the person that's paying you to fix my wife and help my wife, and this is what you're going to do to me." It all makes sense that this would happen. Now, yeah, is it coincidental that he happened to show up to the one soccer game that Jimmy showed up to? Maybe. Like, in my head, I know we didn't see, but in my head,
Mhm.
I feel that this husband probably went to his work, went to his house, tried to, figure out all these things to then, maybe talk to the neighbor who was like, "Oh yeah, he's, the daughter's at the game." I mean, she probably wouldn't do that, but
Mhm.
whatever. I think he probably went through a bunch of different things to figure out, maybe he'll be at the game. Oh, he happens to be here. Cool.
The most important thing to me anyway is just that, because like the ending is so satisfying for the arc of just this pilot, I'm able to overlook mostly what little beefs I have with it here or there. I think it's just mostly I enjoy both the characters in this
Mhm.
episode, the comedy in this episode, because there's a number of little things I think that just work so well. I love
Yeah.
meeting all of the individual patients that we see with Jimmy, who are all going in with these different things. We have, of course, the classic guy who's just like, why don't women love me? Well, maybe it's because you're just like terrible and objectifying and like doing all these other things. And he's just listing off what he needs. And of course, it's like, oh, she has to be super hot. And then it's like, really, really?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it was cool to see some of the patients that are in there and some of the things that I think a lot of us think people would probably be going to therapy about if you haven't been to therapy yourself. But I mean, I will say that the thing that I think that this pilot did really well is that they didn't drag out what Jimmy was doing, that there were consequences in the first episode,
Yeah.
because I kind of thought it was going to go on an arc, more predictable arc where it was going to be like, yeah, he's actually helping these people by doing something unconventional, and in return it's making him feel better. I thought we were going to get a couple of episodes before the husband would show up or Sean would go off. I did not expect it to all unfold as fast as it did. And I'm really happy that it did, because it's not that often anymore with the amount of shows that we watch
Yeah.
where we get something that's a surprise anymore. Like, usually you can kind of track where things are going,
Yeah.
and
And
not here.
it really raises the question, of course, like, okay, if he's already failed at this, and I think we can all argue he's really failed at this, like, I mean, Sean's now in even more trouble. He's going to be in huge professional trouble because of all this. There are plenty of witnesses for what happened in this given moment. Like, he can't walk it back. It's such a great premise for episode 2.
Yeah, because going into episode 2, I'm assuming, and you've seen it, so, obviously you
Yeah.
know what's happening, but I don't. I'm assuming that Gabby and Paul are going to need to step in because they're seemingly all part of the same practice.
Yeah.
And if Jimmy is doing this, and now he has two patients where things have gone really sideways, that could affect what they're doing as well. If he is part of this practice, they're all in it together. So I feel like at some point, Gabby and Paul are going to have to step up, or, one or both, to be like, okay, we need to help fix Jimmy. Because if we don't help fix Jimmy, we're going to also lose our practice. Everything's just going to go sideways.
Yeah, like they have to, and I think it's such an interesting position for them to be in because like clearly they care about Jimmy as a person,
Mhm.
but they also care about their jobs, and they don't want to.
For sure, and they
Yeah,
should.
they don't want to go down with the Jimmy ship here. Now, you mentioned early on the water and your relatability with Gabby. I will.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, uh-oh.
There is nothing I have related with Jimmy more with than the idea of I want to take a movie bath. I'm not saying I have done this, but I'm just saying, isn't it a dream to just like sit in a nice bubble bath and just like watch a movie or a TV show or just like have it
That seems like a long time to be in the bath. Like movies these days are like 3
okay.
hours.
I'm not saying you watch Oppenheimer in the bath here. I'm saying you find something that's like an hour and a half. No, okay.
An hour and a half. Oh, I can't even
Can you
imagine how wrinkly my fingers would be.
do you watch an episode of Shrinking then in the bath?
I
Like
would,
maybe.
yeah, something a little shorter. Otherwise, like your skin's just gonna be slipping off your
Yeah,
body.
no, okay, there we go. That is the standard. Here's the thing, Jimmy. I will watch Shrinking episode 2 in the bath. No, I'm not really doing that, but no, I love this pilot very, very much.
Yeah.
I remember watching it for the first time and just being like, wow. Like I can't believe they did this so fast. I'm so excited to see where they go from here. How much grumpier is Harrison Ford gonna be? So like so many questions.
Absolutely. So we are going to be here covering this show till the end. Every Thursday, every Sunday, you're going to get another episode dropping.
Yeah, so thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to all of our patrons. We really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We'll see you here next time.